My name is Tenzin Kunga, and I'm the chair of the Tibetan community in Britain. This is a very difficult time for all Tibetans and also to followers of Buddhism and also the admirers of His Holiness all around the world. This is a very difficult time, and personally, I feel like all Tibetans, deeply hurt and heartbroken to see all these false and baseless accusations, targeted against our revered leader, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama. I take, deep offense to all the wild, and unsubstantiated claims that have been made by, so-called politically correct-sounding liberals, as well as so-called unbiased media people, and so-called social media influencers who just by looking at a 20-second clip, which we know has been clearly disseminated with the express intention of defaming His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And these people have just gone by the face value of that 20-second clip and have made their own judgments and accusing His Holiness the Dalai Lama of all kinds of false allegations. And this is really deeply hurting for all the Tibetans, and like all Tibetans, I'm also deeply sad. But one thing that we Tibetans all know really very, very well, having His Holiness as our leader, is that he is someone who has always kept the larger public at his heart, forsaking all his personal interests. All his work has, over these last 87 years, has been towards universal responsibility, towards promoting compassion, kindness, warm-heartedness. And we know that his character is impeccable, and no amount of these attempts by the Chinese government will be able to even as much as make a small dent to his character.
So recently, Tibetan community in Britain published a statement on His Holiness Dalai Lama. Can you talk about what is the core of that statement?
Yes, we released the statement very recently, and this statement was more of a reassurance to the Tibetans, and the main message of the community is that the Tibetan community in Britain stands with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in our statement, we have mentioned about how His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been a force for good to bring in important universal values such as compassion, kindness, and how his lifelong commitments have been to bring about the sense of oneness of the 7 billion humanity, and how he has been engaging with scientists to see how science and Buddhist philosophy can be used for the betterment of the humanity. So these are some of the messages that we put out in our statement, but I would like to mainly underline that it's very important that the Tibetan community remains united at this very difficult time, because those who are trying to bring obstacles to our freedom struggle, and also those who are trying to defame His Holiness the Dalai Lama, their intention is to, one, try to damage the unreachable reputation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and two is to create divisions within our community, which we will never give them an opportunity, and we would like to urge everyone to stay united at this time.
Tashidele, my name is Lhamo, and I am currently on the Tibetan community of Britain as the Youth Coordinator and Cultural Secretary. In my other life, I also work as a medical doctor here in London. So I was deeply and very disappointed with seeing the highly edited video of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the many negative and defaming comments that were made. I was very upset with how social media, and even more disappointed with the media itself, for not doing their due diligence. They didn't research the topic, they didn't look into the cultural background into it, and I don't think it was good enough, quite frankly. I think that I would expect a level of professionalism from especially these big media companies, and if a layperson like myself or anyone else can find the full video on the internet, then I think they could have done so as well. It isn't very difficult to find a Tibetan person or reach out to the Tibetan government to find out about what Tibetan culture is like, and I think a lot of the hurt and upset that was caused could have been avoided with a little bit of background work before releasing such defamatory articles. And I think it has caused upset not only to the Tibetan community here, the Tibetan community all over the world, and exile Tibetans probably in Tibet as well as the Buddhist community in the world, because we all see His Holiness in such high light, and I think his actions throughout the years have really highlighted what a genuine, honest and compassionate spiritual leader, but also important person he is to Tibetan people in general.
So, what is your message to the Tibetans inside and outside Tibet?
So I think there's a couple of things that I would really like to say. In terms of the Tibetans outside of Tibet, so like us in exile here, I think it's important we remember to stick together in such times, and I have seen the impact that the Tibetan communities have had in raising awareness about the situation. And I think also the Tibetans in Tibet, it's important to understand that we know that although they can't they don't have the opportunity to talk about what's happened and to defend the Dalai Lama himself. We know that their hearts are with us, and we, being free and having the luxury of doing so, will have to do this on their behalf. I think that's really important. There is one more thing I wanted to say. This is more with regards to the media rather than the Tibetan people themselves. I think I was very disappointed with the media as well, because so many things are happening to Tibetans in Tibet. There is so much suffering and human rights violations, and the thing the media is publishing is a story about something that was misconstrued about the Dalai Lama. What about all of the human rights abuses that are happening to the Tibetan people, to the Uyghur people? There are so many things happening that could have been put in the media instead. There have been more than 150 self-immolations of Tibetan people. People are burning themselves in protest of Chinese illegal occupation of Tibet and what they are doing there. More than 1 million Tibetan children are being forcibly put into Chinese colonial boarding schools. All of these are big issues. They're not allowed to learn about their own culture. They're not allowed to learn their own language. They can be as young as 4 years old. They do not get to spend time with their families. This is erasing the Tibetan identity. That is what the real issue is here, and that's what the media is not commenting on. Instead, they are defaming and criticizing a leader who has worked his whole life in order to try and bring support for the Tibetan cause and the suffering that the Tibetan people have gone through, but is also just not only helping the Tibetan people, he is advocating for love and compassion for the whole wider community, the whole world in general. So that was my biggest thing that I wanted to say.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.